The last time I shared my progress with the $100 flip-up challenge, I had completed a system with a Ryzen 5 2600 and an RX 580. This PC was a solid performer and I managed to purchase some minor upgrades for a very low price. After uploading that video, I sold the PC locally for $360. Now, for the next flip, I have $419 available to spend, along with some leftover parts that I've accumulated. To start, I wanted to share the absolute haul of parts I've gotten since my last video. My focus has been to stay active on Facebook Marketplace and jump on any great deals as soon as they come up. I've received a few comments on recent videos questioning the realism of some deals that I've gotten. My goal is to always find value wherever I look for components. With patience and discipline while searching and bartering, you can often get better deals than you might think possible. Another big factor is how populated and rich your local market is with listings. I'm lucky to live in an area between 3 fairly large cities where an abundance of deals gives buyers many options and pushes prices down. A few weeks ago, I was able to get a complete system that would have been a pretty high-end rig about 9 to 10 years ago. The bundle included an i5 4690K with a Cooler Master tower cooler, a Gigabyte GA Z97X Gaming 7 motherboard, 32 gigs of DDR4 RAM, an EVGA classified GTX 980 Ti, and an EVGA G2 850-watt power supply. All of these components were housed in a very large Fantex Enthulux case. There were also a few storage drives, including a 120GB M.2 SSD and a Samsung Evo 250GB SATA SSD. The initial listing for this build was $250, including a newer high refresh rate gaming monitor, but I was able to talk the seller down to $150 without the monitor. This is a pretty good value overall. That was a great way to start this parts haul, already giving me a complete system to upgrade. The next deal I found was another listing on Facebook Marketplace. It included a Ryzen 3 2300X, a Gigabyte GA A320M S2H motherboard, 16GB of ADATA DDR4 RAM, and a 3GB Asus GTX 1060 graphics card. The bundle was listed at $140, but I was able to get $40 off because the seller was eager to get rid of it. Another value purchase I made was the GTX 970, which I recently tested and shared on the channel. For $42, I got a Gigabyte G1 WindForce model on eBay. Although I don't have an immediate plan for this card, I wanted to add it to my parts pool. After acquiring these components, I was left with $127 for a few minor upgrades. To start the flipping process, I decided to recase the i5 system. While I don't necessarily dislike the Fantex case, I believe a smaller, more modern case will make it easier to sell these older but still usable components. Another change I wanted to make was take out 2 DIMMs, leaving just 16GB of RAM. While 32GB of system memory would be a good selling point, having an extra kit on hand would be nicer for the series going forward. I also decided to use a different lower-end power supply since I found a Thermaltake Smart 700-watt unit for just $31.50 in like-new condition on Amazon. Additionally, I managed to find an Antec Dark Phantom DP502 Flux case, which was resold on Amazon for $40.20 after shipping. Lastly, I decided to throw in the 2TB Seagate Barracuda hard disk drive that I had on hand from the last video just to spice things up for the buyer a little bit more. After getting everything assembled, I was very happy with how it turned out. The new case matches the overall aesthetic of the parts much better and even has built-in RGB with a hub and controller. I did notice that the 980 Ti was sagging slightly, which made sense considering how heavy this particular unit is. So I decided to invest in a $5 adjustable GPU support. It's very low profile and can be set to whatever height you need. Before selling the system, I ran a few games to benchmark its performance and to provide in-game performance data to potential buyers. First, I tested Cyberpunk 2077, a pretty intensive title that still runs fine on most capable older hardware. At 1080p with the high preset, I immediately noticed the 4-core 4-thread 5690K wouldn't allow for much CPU headroom. However, with an average of 60 FPS and only occasional drops into the 40s due to some CPU bottleneck, I found this sort of performance to be decent enough. Next, I tested Baldur's Gate 3 at 1080p on the Ultra preset. The processor-intensive nature of this game caused a significant CPU bottleneck in the most intensive locations. I chose the Ultra preset because I was getting similar frame rates with less GPU usage on the low, medium, and high presets. In the Worms Crossing area, which is quite CPU intensive, I averaged around 40 FPS, with some dips of around 30 FPS. In less intensive locations like camp, frame rates climbed well into the 60s. Lastly, I ran Ghost of Tsushima in native 1080p with medium settings. In some of the early game locations, I was getting around 50 FPS, and the CPU held up just fine in this title. All in all, this i5 system has some decent performance. It would likely fare extremely well in older games and esports. The 980 Ti with 6GB of video memory still holds up with driver support and good performance, and there is some minor upgrade potential to a CPU like a 4770 or 4790 series i7. After listing the PC, I was able to sell it within a day for $320, which I thought was a fair price for both me and the buyer. I explained to them the potential for a few upgrades, but noted that the system was mostly made up of older components. His main use case were games like League of Legends, Grand Theft Auto 5, and Minecraft. He admitted the primary reason for buying my system in particular is that he liked the look of the system and wanted an Intel CPU with an NVIDIA graphics card. After accumulating the parts I shared today and flipping the one system, I was left with $370 cash on hand for the next video. My goal going forward is to use some of the leftover parts like the AM4 bundle and the abundance of GPUs that I have. I will still keep an eye out for good deals and hopefully share another episode of this flip up challenge sooner than I was able to upload this one. If you want to follow along, consider subscribing to the channel. Also, if you have any suggestions for what I should do going forward, questions, or personal PC flipping experience, don't hesitate to comment them. Thank you.